Drop all the euphemisms, drop all the legalese. What they are talking about here is guaranteed all-white rule, again, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in South Carolina, in Louisiana. I mean, you think about how diverse those states are. What they're talking about reimposing, going back to, is guaranteed all-white rule in states that have huge, huge populations of black voters.
Oh boy. Well, today the Supreme Court heard arguments as to if the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is actually racist to non-black voters. And the 6 conservative judges, including Clarence Thomas, seem to agree that yes, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has, quote, outlived its usefulness. And Brett Kavanaugh even went so far as to say that any laws that have to do with trying to make equality work need to have time limits, and that the time limit for the Voting Rights Act may well be up. Since 2013, there have been several Supreme Court rulings that have diminished the original power of the 1965 law, starting with Shelby County versus Holder, which said that it was unconstitutional for the federal government to have to approve states' voting laws. So that meant that the states could come up with whatever kind of voting laws that they wanted, and there wasn't a check on that from the federal government. Within hours of that opinion, certain states started making voting more restrictive, adding things like voter ID requirements and changing the times that you can vote to be less convenient.
Today, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments about a case coming out of Louisiana, and the essence of the case is whether or not the Voting Rights Act is reverse racist. Is it racist against non-black voters? And to that, I can't help but think about the history of these United States, specifically for black folks, as African people taken from our land, brought across the Atlantic Ocean to become slaves in perpetuity in this nation. We, against our will, helped build and became the backbone of one of the greatest economies on earth. And from the time of emancipation, black folks have really been seeking one thing, which is the opportunity to have equal protection under the law.
Boy. So we got to continue our coverage of the mainstream liberal media, boohoo, whine, and crime, melting down in tears, okay, over the fact that the Supreme Court is effectively about to end racism when it comes to gerrymandering, okay? The Supreme Court has a case in front of them involving Louisiana that was forced by the courts based off Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to draw an extra black district because essentially the Voting Rights Act requires that you draw racialized districts, right? And again, the original intent of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act was to, quote unquote, protect black voting rights. However, it has been 50, 60 years since that piece of legislation, and the Supreme Court is trying to decide whether or not it is still necessary to draw maps based off race, okay? Because according to the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause, okay, the 14th Amendment, you're not supposed to have the government discriminating based off race or doing racial remedies, right? Or drawing congressional maps based off race, okay? The government is not supposed to do this, okay? They're supposed to treat people equally, not draw maps based off race that end up having Democrats basically have districts that they otherwise wouldn't have, okay? If the maps were actually drawn in ways that make sense, right? Not by race, okay? And now you have the black liberals, boohoo, whine, and crime foul, right? They're now going after Clarence Thomas, okay? It is going to be open season on Clarence Thomas because of the fact that Clarence Thomas is essentially leading the way. A black Supreme Court justice is leading the way in taking a sledgehammer to the racist Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Take a look.
Yet the plaintiffs, with Clarence Thomas's agreement, believe that following Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act actually violates the Equal Protection Clause. That is crazy. On its face, just crazy. But anyway, the plaintiffs asked for a re-argument on whether Section 2, whether it actually is race conscious and it violates the Equal Protection Clause, right? Which is a part of the 14th Amendment. And they also based their argument on the 15th Amendment. So in effect, the case asks, can Congress still require race-sensitive remedies? Or is Section 2 itself unconstitutional? They got this thing between the Equal Protection Clause and Section 2 and the 14th Amendment. They got it so twisted that it now hurts black people the way whites use it against us. Anyway, SCOTUS upheld the second black majority voting district, including the conservatives on the court. But Clarence Thomas was not having it. He dissented. All right, he wrote a dissenting opinion where he said that he has been fighting this for 30 years and it was time to use the Equal Protection Clause to basically finish gutting the Voting Rights Act. And once again, keep in mind, both were added to the law for our protection. And here, the only black man and the second black man to serve on the court is using one civil rights law against another one. The man argued that Congress lacks the authority to impose these kinds of remedies. He went on to say that Section 2 conflicts with the Equal Protection Clause, folks. I'm trying to get you to see how crazy that is. I mean, that is just totally bonkers to use the Equal Protection Clause to gut the last remaining provision of the Voting Rights Act. And if the court rules in his favor, if the court follows him, which I believe they will this time, it could make almost every black majority district that came about as a result of the Voting Rights Act to be in jeopardy of getting eliminated. And that will be horrible.
All right, y'all, quick break from the show because this is important. Look, we talk a lot here about standing up for yourself, not letting big corporations, the government, or anybody else push you around. But what happens when real life hits, car accidents, workplace injuries, medical mistakes, and suddenly you're the little guy going up against a massive insurance company? Well, that's where Morgan & Morgan comes in. There's a reason reporters never run out of breaking news. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. They've recovered over $25 billion for 500,000 clients with more than 1,000 lawyers nationwide, and they're built on one simple idea. For the people. That means when you're hurt, you don't pay them a dime up front. They only get paid if you win. And trust me, these big companies have teams of big lawyers working against you. You need somebody just as powerful fighting for you. When you hire Morgan & Morgan, it's like hiring a legal army that has your back. If you're injured because of somebody else's negligence, you deserve to be paid. So if you've been hurt in an accident, at work, or anywhere in between, don't roll the dice alone. You can check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. You can start your claim now by clicking the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen from your phone's camera. Because at the end of the day, protecting yourself and your family isn't just common sense. It's conservative values in action. Yeah, horrible, because Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, as you guys saw at the beginning of this video, says that that would lead to all white rule, right? Which again, apparently would be a horrible thing, right? According to MSNBC. Okay. Now, again, you know, what this black lawyer, and I'm using that term very loosely here because I think activist is probably a more appropriate term to describe this guy. What this guy is basically saying is that, hey, you know, black conservatives like Clarence Thomas, they're a problem, right? They're a problem because they actually uphold the Constitution, okay? The Equal Protection Clause is very clear, right? This is why affirmative action got shot down, is that the government is not supposed to be engaged in giving out racial remedies or giving out resources or, you know, basically legislating based off race, right? That is what the government is not supposed to do, okay? We're supposed to be getting away from that. Now, again, you can argue there are sections of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act that when it was passed was unconstitutional, but it was passed and it was allowed to be upheld because of the necessity for some type of racial reconciliation, right? I mean, again, this was Jim Crow. The country at the time was very divided, it was a very controversial thing. Like we were living in a different reality. It was a whole different reality than what we're living in right now. Okay. It was a different country. So again, the argument is that, hey, it's necessary, even though it might be unconstitutional. It's necessary because, hey, we got to deal with this problem. However, it was never supposed to be permanent, right? The system is literally working the way it's supposed to work, in the sense that it should have been passed in the first place, but out of necessity, it was passed. That just means over time, you got to get rid of it, right? You got to slowly but surely get rid of it, because in the long run, right, the idea is that everybody in this country is treated equally, right? That is the idea, and we have to get there. I personally believe, me personally, right, as a black person, I believe that the playing field has been leveled, right? I mean, and I'm just saying this based on my own personal experience, being a black person growing up in the South. I don't believe that based off my skin color, based off my race, I've had less opportunities. In fact, I kind of feel like I've had more opportunities based off my skin color and my race than I otherwise would have had if I was born in a different situation. So again, for me personally, I just don't see where, a black person at this point in this country, again, is being held back simply because of their skin color and their race. I think it really comes down to the individual's decisions and also the environment they were born to. Again, not based off race, okay, or any type of society where you have this systemic discrimination that is holding black people back. No. I actually just believe that it mostly comes down to, hey, were you born into a good family, two-parent household? What are their values? And what individual choices do you make as a person? I believe that those are the primary determinants in regards to whether or not somebody's going to be successful, regardless of your race, okay? And there's plenty of evidence of this because, again, if you're black and you're born into a good family, good values, you make good decisions, you're going to be at least middle class, like guaranteed. It's not hard. Like, it really is not hard to be middle class in America if you're of average intelligence, right? So, again, that average intelligence part, I know some people may struggle with that, but I'm just saying, if you, again, average intelligence, born into a decent situation, even if your situation is not great, your skin color, your race is not what's holding you back, right? That's not the determining factor, okay? So with that being said, because of that, yes, it makes sense that you roll back these provisions that, again, had good intentions, right, when placed, and you can argue were necessary at the time. But now, fast forward 50, 60 years in the future, it's just not necessary, right? It's not necessary. It's just not. So, that is how I feel about it. But again, some people like Rachel Maddow, MSNBC, they're worried about all white rule, okay? I don't think that's actually what would happen. I think that what actually would happen is that black people need to think about not being Democrats, right? The only reason why you don't get black representation, so-called black representation, is because black people all vote Democrat, and white Democrats don't want to vote for black people, apparently. But no, seriously, that actually would help mitigate the problem of there being no quote-unquote black districts, because all of the districts become Republican. There are no Democrat districts. Well, black people weren't all Democrats, and they were 50-50 Republican, then you would see more black representation, right? That's the funny part about it. The reason why this is a problem is because black people mostly vote for Democrats. If they didn't vote for Democrats, this would be an issue. So again, in my opinion, right, if you want more black representation, then I don't know, man, maybe black people should start voting for Republicans, right? Vote for some black Republicans, and you'll get your black representation, right? If you actually start voting Republican, then guess what? You will have more people that look like you try to appeal to you, right? But again, when you just vote Democrat no matter what, it's almost like, well, what's the point, right? What's the point? So, again, in my opinion, I think that it's the right thing to do, right? I mean, that's why a lot of these black liberals hate black conservatives so much, because black conservatives are loyal to the country over our race, right? That is, again, why they don't like black conservatives, because it's like, well, yeah, I believe in law and order. Yeah, I believe in following the law of the land. Yeah, I believe in the Constitution. Like, clearly, we're supposed to be moving away from this type of stuff, right? From racist policies, right? Or race-based policy. Yeah, that is what we should be striving towards, okay? And, I mean, ultimately today, a lot of these black liberals see it as, well, no. See, you have to be loyal to the race over the country, right? Who cares about the country? Who cares if this is actually good for the country? No. What you have to do is that you got to make sure that you support anything that we see is advantageous for us, which in my opinion, I'm not sure what type of advantages I get, right, out of black Democrats get elected or black Supreme Court justices. I don't get any benefit from that, right? It doesn't help me out, okay? It does not help me out one bit, right? It does not help me out one bit. So with that being said, again, we got to react to MSDNC, okay, because they're panicking over what it means for these districts to not be drawn along racial lines, because what that means is that Democrats are going to lose power, right? Which is what they really, really, really are concerned about more so than anything. They don't care about the black representatives. They care about Democrats losing power. That's what they really care about.
Joining us now, senior writer at Slate and co-host of the Amicus podcast, Mark Joseph Stern, historian, professor, and chair of African American Studies at Emory University, Carol Anderson, and director at the Center for Politics, editor-in-chief of The Crystal Ball, and author of Campaign of Chaos, Larry Sabato. All right, let's start with the legal part of this first. Mark, tell me what was argued in front of the Supreme Court today and where it appears the justices were likely to fall.
So lawyers argued that Louisiana violated the Constitution when it drew a second majority black district in order to comply with the Voting Rights Act. For decades, the Supreme Court has interpreted the Voting Rights Act to require these opportunity districts that have large black and brown populations so that these communities can elect the representatives of their choice. But today, lawyers argued that that is unconstitutional, that taking race into account to draw districts, even if it is designed to boost representation for minorities, even if it is designed to remedy past discrimination against minorities, that violates the Equal Protection Clause by considering race, and that the Constitution must be colorblind. And it sounded like a majority of the justices are leaning toward embracing some form of that argument, which would essentially dismantle the Voting Rights Act as we know it today.
How do you know that that's the way that they were leaning?
All 6 of the Republican-appointed justices indicated that they think that the Voting Rights Act has essentially outlived its usefulness. Justice Brett Kavanaugh continually said that there has to be a time limit on any race-conscious law and suggested that the expiration date for the VRA has arrived. Justice Barrett suggested that Congress went beyond what the Constitution requires in prohibiting these kind of racially skewed maps, and that it couldn't be squared with the Equal Protection Clause. Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, all indicated that protecting black communities by drawing race-conscious maps that give them more representation is actually racial discrimination, that it is unconstitutional because of the mere consideration of race. And so the law, again, as we know it, must fall. Now, I don't know exactly how the justices will decide to dismantle the law. They could interpret it differently. They could strike it down. But all 6 of them seem to be leaning towards some kind of result that would radically weaken, if not altogether demolish, what we know of the Voting Rights Act today.
So, yeah, I mean, again, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's very straightforward. You cannot have the government being like, hey, yeah, we're going to draw these districts based off race, right? We're going to have a black district. We're going to have a white district. Again, the whole point was to get away from that. Now, Ketanji Brown Jackson, again, who's black, believes that black voters are disabled, right? She literally compared black people to disabled people during the hearing. As justification, right? It's justification for why is it that the government needs to be involved in, drawing maps, gerrymandering based off race. Because again, we all know if the roles were reversed, if they were purposely drawing districts for white voters, right? Just based on whiteness, okay? We want to put all the white people here, all the white people there, right? We need to make sure that all the maps are drawn in a way where, again, it maximizes the interest of white voters, right? That would be unconstitutional. Nobody would agree with that, right? So again, according to the Equal Protection Clause, just basic logic, right? If that applies in that situation, which again, we all agree with, right? That's the whole point of the Equal Protection Clause. Then when it comes to, right, black voters, right? It's the same thing. It's the same logic. You can't draw lines, again, based off race, right? Even when it comes to trying to protect their interests, because you can't draw lines trying to protect other people's interests or other races' interests, okay? You can't do that, okay? It is what it is. Again, it's called equal treatment, right? Under the law. That's what it's called. I thought that's what we wanted. I thought that's what we wanted as a country, but apparently not, right? Apparently, we want special rights and privileges for certain groups of people, and we don't know the time limit on how long this is necessary, right? Will it be one of those things where we live in a world? Because here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, okay? If the demographic trends continue, eventually, whites are going to be in the minority, right? How much of the minority? We don't know, right? There'll be a majority minority, right? Eventually. And then after that, right, who knows? Could be a minority. At that point in time, would any of these people be arguing that, them whites, they in the minority now, right? They the minority. We need special remedies to make sure we draw out districts to protect them, right? Because that's what this is headed to, right? If you want to continue with this woke line of reasoning, with current population trends, if it continues the way that it is, right? That is the future that you're looking at. You're looking at a future where it's like, oh, no, well, we got to make sure we draw districts to protect white voting power because they're a minority, right? That's the future that you're looking at. Now, again, I don't think that leftists will agree with that in the future. I don't think they're going to agree with that. I really don't. So, it's one of those things where right is right and wrong is wrong, okay? And the Supreme Court is essentially saying, all right, cool, it's actually time to roll back something that was wrong, right? But we did it because it was the right thing to do, even though it was wrong by the Constitution. We're rolling it back because enough time has passed. And I think that that's how it should work. That's how it should work. Don't worry. If we go back to Jim Crow, which is what these people are afraid of, if we go back to Jim Crow, don't worry, right? Don't worry. Hey, we can do what we got to do as a society to fix it, right? But I don't think that we're going back to Jim Crow. I don't think that's going to actually happen again.
If this does happen, if it is overturned, if your assessment of where they're leaning is correct, let us show what could be impacted. This is a few maps showing VRA-protected congressional districts that could be affected. There's one in Louisiana, there is another in Alabama, and there is another in Texas. And those are the number of specific districts that could change. You see Florida in there as well, and a few other states. So, Larry, if this does get overturned, what are those races likely to look like?
Well, they'll be interesting because the current majority-minority districts will be broken up, will be so-called cracked, and you'll have portions of them going into redder districts so that Republicans living in other parts of the district presumably can overvote them and continue to elect the incumbents or the incumbents' Republican successors. Look, some estimates are already suggesting as high as 19 seats, Democratic seats lost if Section 2 is exploded by the Supreme Court. I don't think it'll be that high. I think it'll be more like a dozen. But when you combine a dozen lost seats for Democrats, if the Voting Rights Act Section 2 is struck down, with the redistricting that's going on around the country, pressured by Trump and pushed by the White House, that's going to produce a net gain for Republicans of 6, 7, 8 seats right there. And yes, I'm taking into account Proposition 50. I think it'll pass in California, +5 for Democrats, but there's +5 for Republicans in Texas. You put that together, and basically you're going to normally have a Republican House of Representatives. It will take a strongly Democratic year, a wave year for Democrats like 2006 or 2018 in Trump's first term to get Democrats into a narrow majority. That's what it's going to do.
Yeah. And that's why Democrats are trying to appeal to the lunatics so badly, right? Because they need the lunatics excited, right? They need the far left excited to vote for them, right? They're desperate because it really is make or break, right? Like, this is why there's so much panic over this, because if Democrats lose the midterms, it's over for them. It's over. I don't see Democrats winning for another decade if they lose these midterms. I'm so serious right now. I just don't see how their party survives. So again, this is make or break for Democrats. And as of right now, they're not performing well enough in the general ballot, right, to make anybody believe that there's going to be a massive blue wave. Okay, I'm not saying there's going to be a red wave, but if it's just kind of even kill, right, Democrats are cooked. They're done just because of this stuff, just because of the Supreme Court, the potential Supreme Court decision, and just because of redistricting. And if California's redistricting effort doesn't pass, then they're really cooked, right? That would be terrible. That'd be absolutely terrible for Democrats at that point. So again, we're going to see. But doomsday is coming, right? It is coming for Democrats, and it's not looking good. But hey, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.